Good morning, dear colleagues. It's of great pleasure and honor, of course, to welcome you to this high-level virtual event on accelerating the level of commitment to fight human trafficking and modern slavery during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, co-sponsored by the missions of Austria, Bangladesh, Nigeria, the United Kingdom, the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes, and of course, my own country, the state of Qatar. The objective of today's event is to discuss concrete ideas on how to step up international cooperation and bring issues related to human trafficking and modern slavery to the forefront of recovery efforts from the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a rich and highly engaging program today with dynamic speakers who are each leaders in their respective fields. We are also pleased to have with us CNN international news anchor Richard Quest, who will moderate our high-level panel. And of course, Richard does not need an introduction, who he himself is a strong voice against human trafficking and modern slavery. Before handing over to our great moderator, let me introduce three keynote speakers today. It is now my great honor and pleasure, of course, to introduce a keynote video message by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez.
Pandemic and poverty, conflict and climate emergency, the cascade of crises we face has put the most vulnerable at even greater risk of exploitation, violence, and abuse by human traffickers. In every region, women and girls, refugees and migrants, the downtrodden and desperate are being trafficked for sexual exploitation and coerced into forced labor. Women make up nearly half of the trafficking victims, while 19% are girls. In low-income countries, children account for half of victims of this multi-billion-dollar industry. This is unimaginable. Almost every country is affected by trafficking, whether as a country of origin, transit, or destination. And all countries must therefore be part of the solution. I thank Austria, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Qatar, the European Union, and the United Kingdom for convening this meeting to strengthen international action to prevent trafficking and protect people from modern-day slavery. I urge you to promote increased assistance and cooperation through the political declaration and the global plan of action and implementation of the United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime and its Trafficking in Persons Protocol. Trafficking victims must be provided with assistance and protection. They should never face punishment for acts committed as a consequence of being trafficked. With record numbers of people on the move, governments must meet their commitments under the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. I urge all member states to forge new partnerships with the private sector, civil society, and others to prevent and end the widespread misuse of technology and social media to exploit vulnerable people. Together, let's renew our efforts to end human trafficking and modern slavery as we work to build an inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, and I wish you a successful meeting.
We thank, of course, the Secretary General for his commitment and inspirational words in the opening of this high-level event. Let me move on now, and it gives me great pleasure and honor now to introduce His Excellency Dr. Ali bin Saeed bin Smaykh Al-Marri, the Minister of Labor of the State of Qatar, to deliver his opening remarks. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Hey, good afternoon from Doha and good morning. Thank you very much for to give me this opportunity to share with you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the State of Qatar is delighted to co-sponsor with Austria, Bangladesh, Nigeria, and the United Kingdom and the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime. This high-level event on a celebration that the level of the commitment to fight human trafficking and modern slavery during COVID-19 and beyond. Combating modern slavery and the human and the protection of victims, both children and adults, is one of our highest priorities. Qatar over the years has implemented key reforms. These are largely due to the vision of the commitment of His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar. Our efforts are based on the principle that the effective anti-trafficking and modern slavery strategy should be based on prevention, prosecution, protection, and partnerships and victim-centric human rights-based approach. For instance, the Ministry of Labor is working to prevent forced labor by reducing systemic vulnerabilities and requirement, employment, and working conditions. We have initiated and carry out many policies and programs that have helped victims in Qatar. These include the creation of labor dispute resolution committees, elimination of exit permit requirement for migrant workers, implementation of minimum wage, and abolition of no objection certificate. Actually, we are the first country in the Arab Gulf region to allow all migrant workers to change jobs freely without requiring no objection certificate from the previous employer, which was a key aspect of the Kafala sponsorship system. We have also established a wage protection system to monitor payment and ensure workers across the economy receive their wage in full and on time. It allows the government to monitor wage payment and allow the ministry impose sanctions on companies and employers that do not comply. Our commitment is such that we have gone beyond our border and we established a number of Qatar Visa Center. This helps to protect the rights of workers. In 2017, Qatar established the National Committee for Combating Human Trafficking to act as the national coordinator for monitoring, preventing, and combating human trafficking through coordination with relevant authorities. Include a protection and rehabilitation programs to help victims integrate into society. We also believe that the promise of building back better from COVID-19 offers an opportunity to adapt and implement policies and programs that address the inequalities that often result in vulnerability to modern slavery, child labor, and human trafficking. To conclude, I would like to highlight that our efforts do not end at home. Since 2010, we are top donor to the United Nations Voluntary Trust Fund for victims of trafficking in person, especially women and children. The first global legally binding instrument to protect and assist the victims of trafficking with full respect for their human rights. Our finance support is now over $550,000. I will stop here. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the discussion and ideas and suggestions on the way forward, the fight against trafficking in person and modern slavery. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency, the Minister of Labor of the State of Qatar, for his opening remarks, and I'm really proud to say that the Ministry of Labor in the State of Qatar has been internationally recognized for its effort in the fight against human trafficking by the United Nations and as well as by the United States State Department and Global Report on the fight against human trafficking. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Let me move on now, and I would like, it gives me great pleasure as well to introduce Her Excellency Ms. Ghada Wali, Executive Director of United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes. Of course, Her Excellency was not able to be with us in person today in this virtual meeting, but she has shared with us a video message. If we can listen to it together.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to address this high-level event on trafficking in persons, and I wish to thank Austria, Bangladesh, the European Union, Nigeria, Qatar, and the United Kingdom for sponsoring it. Trafficking in persons is a crime that should not exist today. Yet people continue to be trafficked across the world, and the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened vulnerabilities further still. We need urgent action to step up our support. Firstly, we need to protect people in mixed migration flows and to reduce vulnerabilities to trafficking by enhancing pathways for regular migration. UNODC's Global Report on Trafficking in Persons 2020 found that migrants make up more than 1/3 of the total share of detected victims globally, and they account for the majority of victims in some regions. Secondly, we need to counter the use of new technologies by traffickers. More time spent online during lockdowns has meant more opportunities to manipulate and exploit victims, particularly children. And thirdly, we need to protect and help victims and not punish them. Victims and survivors often suffer terrible abuse by their traffickers, and the pandemic has only made it more difficult to provide them with assistance. To make matters worse, many victims find themselves detained, prosecuted, and punished for acts committed as a consequence of being trafficked. It's crucial to uphold the principle of non-punishment of victims of trafficking and to support them. At our meeting of the principals of the Interagency Coordination Group Against Trafficking on the 15th of November, we reaffirmed the call for prioritized action to address these challenges. As guardian to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its Trafficking Protocol, UNODC is helping countries develop victim-centered responses to trafficking both online and offline across the criminal justice system. Today, states will be adopting strong political declaration, reinforcing the world's commitment to fighting trafficking in persons. UNODC will support your efforts to act on the declaration and end this crime for the protection of people everywhere. Thank you.
We thank Her Excellency, of course, Mrs. Ghada Wali, for her inspirational opening remarks as well. Distinguished colleagues, let me thank you again for taking part in this high-level panel, of course, on behalf of the co-organizers, the missions of Austria, Bangladesh, Nigeria, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and UNODC, and of course my country, Qatar. And we very much look forward to a very, very engaging high-level discussion. And in this, it gives me great pleasure and honor to hand over now to a great friend and a great fighter against human trafficking, of course, and the cause itself, Mr. Richard Quest. Please, the floor is yours.
Ambassador, before you leave, I just want your permission. I want to be cloaked in your authority that I'm going to do things in perhaps a bit of a non-UN way, and whether or not you are okay with that. In other words, we can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Are you all right with that?
I am absolutely all right with that. And this is the purpose, Richard.
Fine. Excellent.
Feel free.
So now we have permission to go our own way. Thank you, Ambassador. My apologies if my signal is breaking up, which I think it might be every now and again, but hopefully you can hear me and you are able to listen to what I'm saying. Let us begin with our commitment to what we call in CNN the Freedom Project. Here's our video of how we view the issue of human trafficking and what we're going to do about it.
One of the things that's horrible about the human trafficking situation in the 21st century is that you can sell a person over and over and over.
These men are sold for 1,200 Libyan pounds, $400 each.
I'm speechless. I don't know how to put this into words. There were human beings auctioning off other human beings.
How are we to ever find them? How are we to ever know who they are?
It's just exploitation, it's trafficking, it's slavery.
We are launching an ambitious undertaking. We're calling it the CNN Freedom Project.
This 7-foot by 7-foot windowless room with just a bed in it was where little girls were forced to have sex.
FBI, search warrant, open up!
These are the wrecks of the vessels that carry people and their dreams.
These two barely in their teens, working up to 10 hours a day.
This is wrong, and we have to stop it.
Scores of refugees have been released from Bedouin custody and have made it across the border to Israel.
500 people rescued during a raid on a brick kiln in southern India.
These farmers have been growing beans for decades. They're about to get their first taste of chocolate.
All of them?
Sure.
Okay with this.
Yeah, they're all with
To be free?
Good, they are free now.
All right, there we go. The work that we've done at CNN in terms of human trafficking and the Freedom Project. I'm coming to you today from Lisbon, where I'm engaged in one or two assignments. My apologies if my picture is freezing, but the nature, I think we're all used to this now. I think we've got used to the idea that when we're doing Zoom calls of this, that, and the other, then the picture may freeze, but hopefully you can still hear me and you will hear the guests that we're talking about. One thing is absolutely crucial in this discussion. I do not want us going in circles, just to be in a position whereby we're making advancements and improvements. And I can see that I think all let's go to His Excellency Keith Shannon, the UK's acting migration and modern slavery envoy. The thing we need to establish, sir, initially is clear. How has the situation worsened during COVID-19? Now, when you answer, bear in mind what we've already heard from the UNDOC director, from the UN Secretary General. We know what the problem is. Please don't restate it. Tell me how much worse it's got.
Thank you, Richard, and hello, everyone. Yeah, I mean, it's a very serious problem, and there is evidence that it may be getting worse, actually, the impact of the pandemic. I think the ILO has estimated that, 160 million people are in modern slavery worldwide, and that potentially there are about another 9 million people at risk because of the pandemic, because of reduced access to regular employment, puts them into much more vulnerable positions. And this is a serious problem that the UK, particularly in its presidency of the G7, has been leading this year with the world's 7 largest economies. And we've been looking in particular at global supply chains. And I think this is an issue that brings it right back to home, because your video was very, very impressive, very emotive, very impactful. But it shows that there are things that we can all do, not just as governments, but as businesses and as individuals, to try and address how people are exploited, actually, in the global supply chain conundrum is part of this. We used to say that the shirt on your back, in your mobile phone, is not the product of forced labor.
Right.
So the G7, under the UK's presidency this year, has been looking very, very seriously about how we can increase transparency, particularly in supply chains, so that this can be exposed much, much more clearly, and people can make informed decisions about how to respond to it, either through personal choice as consumers, but also as through a law enforcement approach.
What do you need? Okay, we're at the point now where everybody knows what the situation is. And I'm aware that the UN process is one of great speeches and policy documentation, but it has at some point to transmit and translate into practicalities. So what do you need?
You're exactly right. It's about sustained commitment by governments, by businesses and individuals, adherence to the Global Compact and the call to action, really following up domestically on international commitments. And that's something the UK government is particularly doing. We were one of the first countries to have a consolidated modern slavery strategy back in 2014. We've got Modern Slavery Act from 2015, lots of learning from that. And I can tell you that at the moment, the UK government is reviewing its modern slavery strategy and expects to publish an updated one next year, spring 2022, bringing in all our experience not just internationally, but also domestically about how we approach the problem, and in particular, giving more scope, more highlighting more survivor voice. It's a joint effort. We must all be involved in this.
And we'll come to you in a moment for more on this once we go into a wider discussion. The Wolfgang Spangler, the Deputy National Coordinator for the Office for Combating Human Trafficking, is with us from Austria. Sir, I know your boss is involved in obviously the lockdown issues that are going on in Austria at the moment. We're glad that you are with us. This importance now post-COVID, we know the situation has got worse. Have we taken our eye off the ball?
So thank you very much for your question. I hope you can all hear me. I'm joining you from my home office somewhere in the outskirts of Vienna, and I'm happy to be here and to participate even if we are troubled by other issues. And COVID and trafficking in human beings has a very deep linkage, and also the pandemic has altered, has changed many of the approaches we need to combat also this hideous crime. And it has been a challenge for various aspects of combating against trafficking in human beings, be that of the authority or of the NGOs. Also, the perpetrators, the criminals who were organizing these hideous activities have been adapting to the situation that the pandemic has produced, and puts us into a completely new perspective. But what remains to be capped is what I call the 3 Cs: coordination, cooperation, and commitments. And they must be the pillars of our future activities. First of all, coordination. In order to best coordinate our efforts, the Austrian government has set up a task force.
Hang on a second. Hang on. I want to stop you. Coordination, cooperation, and what was the third one?
And commitment.
Right. So
commitment.
Commitment is clear. Commitment is clear in the sense that everybody's here. But what is the difficulty with coordination and cooperation? What's the problem in actually implementing both of those?
The difficulty is here that with trafficking in human beings, we are not having a situation like that somebody is committing a robbery or a theft, because everybody knows this is a wrongdoing and you have to fight it, and it's very clear who is the perpetrator, and it's very clear what has to be done, and everybody has a clear opinion about it. Here in trafficking in human beings, you very often have an activity which is a legal activity, which appears to be legal, but which is intermingled and which is overshadowed by a trafficking scheme. And there is criminal activity over something that looks normal, that looks nothing out of the regular, like, for example, labor exploitation. If you see somebody picking apples, it is illicit activity, unless, of course, this is an exploited person where there is a trafficking scheme behind. And that is also where comes in coordination and cooperation, because you have so many different actors. You need to have a real interagency cooperation on the administrative level, and you need to have an in-depth cooperation between the governments and the NGOs. And this is what there is a very big focus on that in Austria.
Fine. So if you take 0 as being no cooperation and 100% being brilliant cooperation, the best we've ever had, could not be better, where are we on that scale? Did you hear me, sir? I think, can you hear me, sir? I think we're having a bit of difficulty speaking. While we try and get him back, let's go to Diane Schmidt, the EU anti-trafficking coordinator. Same question to you, Diane, this issue where we are on the scale, with 0 being no cooperation, it's a disaster, it's awful, it's horrendous, and 100% being it could not be better. Where do you think we are currently? And since you're the coordinator for EU anti-trafficking, I'm guessing that you've got a pretty good idea where the pitfalls are at the moment.
Thank you very much, Richard, also for inviting me. Thanks to all. It's not an easy reply. It's a difficult question. The question is also, do you speak about the global level, or are you speaking about, because I'm dealing with the European Union at European Union level? I think at the level of the European Union, we are quite advanced. At the global level, it might be a little bit more difficult. What are the difficulties? It was already mentioned by Wolfgang Spandinger and by others. The difficulties are that you are often also in cross-border situations. And if and this creates difficulties also in relation to the identification first of the victims and the protection of the victims, but also if you want to go after the traffickers and prosecute and convict them, because there must be exchanges of evidence, there must be cooperation between the different authorities. So at EU level, I think we are not so bad. A lot has to be done. Still, but we have also the chance to have EU agencies like Europol, Eurojust in the judicial area, Europol in the law enforcement cooperation, Frontex also in relation to border cooperation. So you have agencies which ensure this cooperation. At global level, it might be more difficult. What we have also, obviously, we have EU anti-trafficking legislation. It's not perfect. Our priority is really to approach this in a comprehensive way. This means it goes from the prevention to the protection of victims, but also, as I said before, prosecution and conviction. And this for all forms of trafficking, so including labor exploitation. So you have to address this in a very comprehensive way, and this is difficult. Where we start also and where we are looking at now at EU level is obviously, again, prevention, but also going after the demands, after the criminals, after the perpetrators, because it's also like this that you help and support victims. And we are now looking at the EU anti-trafficking legislation in order to see what we can improve in the context of the criminalization of the exploited use of services of victims of trafficking. The criminalization, this is important. So we will have common rules at EU level. We have already common rules, but there are things certainly to improve. There are a lot of discussion about how to tackle forced labor in global value chains. We have published already at EU level guidance in July in order to support companies to address the risk of forced labor in the operation and supply chains. It is a priority at the European Union. And what we are doing now, we are looking, and the European Commission is working on a proposal for legislation on sustainable corporate governance, which will also foresee mandatory due diligence duty and requiring EU companies to account for sustainability impact in their own operations. So I think there's a lot of work going on. And as was also said before, I want to underline it, and this is also why it's so difficult. Everyone has to join forces, the private sector, businesses, national authorities, and we have to work also with civil society organizations. I just arrived in New York one week. I was very surprised. In my hotel room, I found a sign which says, "Stop trafficking human beings." And it was a call on the clients, first to be aware, but I guess also those who are working in the hotel, but also with a hotline for people if they think they are victims or if they know someone who is victim for trafficking human being. I found this really very interesting, coming to New York and seeing this in my hotel room. This is awareness, this is support to victims, and this is something very concrete.
All right, so we'll come back to you in a moment. I want to talk to Dr. Fatima Waziri-Azi, the Director General of the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking of Persons in Nigeria. The situation, we are told, and we've heard so far, the situation is not good. COVID has made it worse. The speakers we've already heard are talking about greater coordination, cooperation. So when you talk about Nigeria, and from your point of view, actually, what is it that you see as the necessity of change here? And please, again, do not restate the problem. We know the problem is there and we know it is bad.
Thank you, Mr. Quest, and good afternoon, everyone. Just to provide a bit of context, NAPTIC was established in 2003 to respond to the scourge of trafficking in persons in Nigeria. We are a specialized anti-trafficking law enforcement agency mandated to investigate all cases of trafficking in persons, including forced labor, child labor, forced prostitution, bonded labor, removal of organs, and all forms of slavery. So talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously for us in Nigeria, it has further brought about additional challenges to our fight against human trafficking. And the consequences of this development is more noticeable in the number of fake job adverts that pop up everywhere on the internet, and also unfounded scholarships abroad. So all aimed at swindling unsuspecting persons and ultimately trafficking some for various forms of exploitation, which is why we have sustained awareness creation and sensitization program, especially at the sub-national level and amongst the young people. And in terms of coordination, obviously, when we talk about issues of trafficking in persons, it's not something one nation or one organization can handle. So we collaborate a lot with, we have donor partners we collaborate with agencies, with high commissions, we collaborate with our fellow law enforcement agencies here in Nigeria. And just very recently,
I'm just going to jump in because I want to know from you what more you need. So I was fascinated because I'm hearing your real example about how large, you see adverts wanting large numbers of people, you see adverts wanting this, you see requests for that. What is it you now need to advance the actions in accelerating the commitment and actually actions? What is it you go to bed at night, hit your head against a brick wall and say, if only they would do this, things would get better?
Yes, to answer your question, Mr. Quest, we need more international cooperation. We need more collaborations with other countries. We need more intelligent sharing. And which is why recently we just signed a cooperation agreement with Côte d'Ivoire on preventing, suppressing, and prosecuting traffickers. We also recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the Republic of Niger on the same matter. So yeah, so basically we just need more collaboration, information sharing, and of course, sustained sensitization. We know that immigration has always been part of us, Africans, and it will always be part of us, but we always encourage, migration to be done the right way.
I'm hearing a common theme here. I'm grateful to you, Director General. I'm hearing a common theme here, the need for greater cooperation and coordination, which is what you're talking about. The thing is, to a novice like me, I'm horrified that at this late stage in the discussion on human trafficking, when there are reams and volumes and documents and more discussion documents than you can shake a stick at, that we're standing here today saying, well, we need more cooperation and coordination, which is why I turn to Martha Newton, the Deputy Director of General Policy at the ILO. It's an unsatisfactory state of affairs. We can all agree on that. But I wonder, where does the leadership need to come from to create that greater cooperation and coordination?
Thank you so much. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I am thrilled that you're cracking some eggs today. I think it's great. And it's what we need when we really want to address this conversation where the rubber hits the road. So I would probably give the example when we talk about coordination and cooperation. Let's give an example. An example would be the work that's been done in Qatar with forced labor. Qatar had an issue that they took head on, and some of the things that they had to deal with in order to address these situations in their own country involve very specific things, investments in increasing their labor inspectorates, and so that people could actually help to identify forced labor, systems and procedures that allow information to actually get to workers and employers, some that may be workers in homes where it's very hard to do, but really thinking about what are those strategies, what could that look like? And then also, for example, why are people succumbing to trafficking in the first place? It's because the vulnerability of their situations. So Qatar, you know what they did last thing? They raised their minimum wage, which is going to make sure that there's a less ability in the country where people can earn a living wage, that they're not falling prey to trafficking. So, I think, Richard, for me, some of the things specifically, it's about innovation. We specifically right now at the ILO are working on having a forced labor innovation challenge where we are really we've got some finalists now in countries like Madagascar and others, where we're able to really empower where, again, the rubber hits the road, and the person who's that frontline person on strategies that they know will work. But there's so much world between the top of the UN and where someone may actually be a worker who's exposed to human trafficking and not sure what they need to do. So we're really working on strategies, also helping governments at the highest level, because if you don't have a rule of law and you don't have a system that works, what are we doing here? So that's very important, and that's something the ILO focuses on. Yes.
Let me be clear. I realize I might sound like an angry old man shouting something must be done. I am exceptionally aware of the complexity of the issue. As John Major famously said once, if there are any easy answers, don't you think we'd have found them by now? So I'm aware that it's not straightforward in terms of that. What I want to try and understand from you now, Martha, is how it's got worse, and how over COVID, but crucially, how we've missed an opportunity to bring it back. Is it too late to bring it back?
No, it's absolutely not too late to bring it back. But I mean, we have to face the reality that we're in terms of just the amount of work hours that have been lost in the world. You're talking, that's 255 million in full-time jobs. I mean, so that the scale is vast. But I think what we've seen here, as far as the work we're doing, that it provides, I never want to talk about COVID providing an opportunity. It just doesn't sound right to say that. But when you have an opportunity to be able to show where, for example, on migration, where restriction and control of movement of victims is much easier by their abusers during lockdowns enforced by governments, and then controlling the spread of COVID-19, governments have to prioritize managing the COVID crisis. So I think for us, it's just clearly employment and social protection. We've learned in this situation, first of all, that we have to have social protection systems so that there is a way that people are protected, so they're not falling vulnerable in the first place. We have to work with governments to have national policies and action plans that really address the specific situations. And we have examples, in COVID that we can utilize. And then also data and research, even though as far as it is very important, because as journalists like you in telling the story, we'll have our new labor estimates out in April. These estimates on forced labor haven't been released since 2016. We'll have new information, and when we have that ability, we will be able to use to capitalize it to help build capacity of constituents with real, programs making real difference in people's lives.
Right. I'm going to do something unusual here. Thank you. Well, we will come back to you in a moment. My email address is richard.quest@warnermedia.com. richard.quest@warnermedia.com. That, in fact, if whoever's doing the name supers, you can put that at the bottom of my name there, if you like, richard.quest@warnermedia.com. That will come to my phone, which is here. And if you have a question that you would like me to ask, or a point that you think, you know, I'm not an expert on this subject, but if you think there is something that I'm missing here, richard.quest@warnermedia.com. I promised you we were going to break some eggs. An omelette must be made. Chandra Warantu is with me, the founder of the Survivor Empowerment Program, Mentari. There is no question of the seriousness and desperation here, but where do we now need to begin to recover some of the lost ground? The people you're dealing with at the Survivor Empowerment Program at Mentari, what do you need to start recovering?
Start recovering is understand the trauma. Understand the trauma of someone that being taken, being abused, having no freedom. That's the most important, because our focus is the victim. That's why trauma-informed victim center is very important in combat trafficking to support and help a victim or survivor here.
So tell me first of all about what you have heard from survivors through the program about the situation as it has evolved over the last year with COVID.
With the COVID, it's very difficult, of course, because of the access to services is almost, say no. It's limited, and this is our focus is not to request them to come to us, but we are the leader, we are the advocate, we are the worker, have to approach them. We are the one who come to them instead of requesting the victim or survivor come to us. This is the changes during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a little bit different. We have to work more hard to protect them, to help them to reintegrate into society and community, which is changes during the COVID-19.
If you're going to do that and you're going to be successful, we've already established coordination and cooperation, but is there an issue of funding as well? Both the Qatari ambassador and the British special envoy, both said that money was being made available, but I'm guessing not enough money is being made available.
Thank you, Mr. Quest. This is absolutely 1000% yes, funding, how we empower and reintegrate someone back into society and live, able to live independently and experience fully freedom. Because without freedom, they cannot move out. Without funding, we will allow them to go back into the situation, vulnerable situation, because not enough funding to help them. Empowerment needs funding, help, economic, and more other things.
The bad news is you're not going to get it.
Yes, it's difficult, but we have to be smart how we use resources to help, how we have to be able to connect the dot in between the resources. So the focus is the victim or the survivor itself. Sometimes we lost focus. We lost focus that victim and survivor need the most help.
Well, hang on. You say you lost focus. Let me challenge you on that, because the victim and the survivor needs help. But to a large extent, that is the end of the process. Surely, because you've already got your victim and your survivor. Don't we need to be putting most of our efforts towards the prevention in the first place?
Yes, but your question is about empowerment though. If your question about the global fight on trafficking, the prevention is the best solution to end trafficking. Because when people get into the problem, experience trafficking, to be trafficked and exploited, it's difficult to make this person back into the situation before traffic. But empowerment here is different, because your focus is on empowerment. It's different if you focus on global action.
Good to speak to you. We'll come back to you, please. I know you have more to say later. John Frank is the Vice President for UN Affairs. Now, the thing we've heard a great deal so far is that on two levels here. Firstly, that we're all working at home, so we're much more au fait, au courant with the technology. Look at me, you're in one place, in New York, I'm guessing. Somebody else is in Nigeria, I'm in Lisbon. But this technology has allowed trafficking to take place, or a greater degree. It can also be a benefit to prevent it taking place. Grateful that Microsoft has joined us, because your technology is everywhere. I'm using it here. So if there's anything goes wrong, blame you. But John Frank, tell me, what are you doing?
Well, societal challenges like human trafficking they do require all global stakeholders to come together and contribute what we have to put on the table. And we believe technology can be used to amplify, scale, and coordinate the international community. I mean, we've been hearing that information sharing and collaboration is difficult, and there is a reason that it's difficult, which is most of the information we have is about victims, and victims, we need to be very careful about sharing information that affects their privacy and security. And so I think that certainly we see an opportunity, but we need to be very careful. And so
the victims, I get that. But I want to talk about the front side of the equation, the use of technology that can help or can facilitate the trafficking, whether it's through information, whether it's through video, whether it's through the procurement of tickets and jobs, or whatever it might be. How much more can you do to help prevent it taking place?
Well, the best way for us to help prevent is to help measure what's actually happening in the real world and be able to discern trends. And so taking the challenge of having to protect victims' security and privacy, in 2018, we started a coalition called Tech Against Trafficking, and working with the International Organization of Migration, put together tools that add synthetic data to the data sets. And we've now created the largest data set ever of victim information. And with the synthetic information, we can make this tool available to everyone. And people can use it to understand the problem better. And I think it's a combination of the domain expertise of people who focus on trafficking and domain expertise of technology with privacy enhancing technologies and data science that give the domain experts a much better perception, insights as to what's happening, and facilitates that kind of sharing and collaboration that we were hearing about was needed.
I guess the issue of commitment isn't it? I mean, I've heard today again and again, coordination, cooperation, commitment. The people have got the commitment. In your view, are we using technology to its best and maximum effect in the prevention of trafficking?
I think there's always opportunities for improvement. And this isn't an area that has a lot of, there's not necessarily people spending a lot of money thinking how can we apply technologies to these challenges. And so opportunities to come in as a technology company and bring other technology companies in. We do depend upon the domain expertise of the people on this panel and others, and what we can bring is technology. But clearly, there's more that can be done, and so we're very enthused about the coalition we've started. We have additional projects going on now, but I think that there's many more opportunities ahead.
We'll come back to you in a moment. Let's go to Kamaluddin Ahmad, the National Human Rights Commission in Bangladesh, where, I suppose the core issue is the increase in people who have been trafficked out of your country, and how, forgive my appalling grammar here, sir, but how much worse has the situation got because during COVID, we simply took our eye off the ball?
Well, thank you, Richard. Definitely, we have heard other speakers also. The situation aggravated because of the fact that during COVID, lots of people lost their jobs in the country. And during lockdown since March to May in 2020, and after that this year also, continuous lockdown put especially people in the informal sector in serious condition. So they faced some kind of situation where people deceived them, allured them to go somewhere else, and found out different alternative routes to go out. That was one of the reasons for them to be convinced about going out. That is one of the most worst kind of thing that we find. And it was really a situation that government also tried to give some kind of motivational supports to people, but it was really not possible during COVID situation to go to all people in the informal sector. That could be one of the reasons, I believe.
So, thank you, sir. We will come back to Bangladesh. I just want to invite all our guests who are with us and watching. If you don't want to email me, then you can ask a question in the chat section, and it will be relayed to me. My technological skills are somewhat minor, but we do have the question facility available to you. Anush Kawar, the chair of the Alliance 8.7, is with us. The comprehensive nature of this, the umbrella nature, if you will. I already see the difficulties that you face in the circular nature of the problem. It's a very bad problem. We need more coordination. We need coordination, and the problem's a very bad problem, and therefore we go in circles. What do you think? How do we break? How do we take? God help me for saying there was an opportunity with COVID, but how do we take the opportunity that COVID has presented and break the cycle?
Thank you very much, Richard, for your question and your challenge. I understand that these recent years, various global partnerships and coalitions have proved somehow efficiency to create synergy and bring sustainable solutions to global challenges. The UN 2030 agenda for the SDG has consecrated this type of multilateral, multi-stakeholder forums. And as you were talking about cooperation and collaboration, Alliance 8.7, that I have the honor to chair, follows this pattern. It is a global partnership created in 2016, bringing together, as of today, more than 400 stakeholders, governments, international organizations, UN agencies, social partners, NGOs, businesses, academics. And this is a unique forum for cooperation to achieve target 8.7 of the SDGs, which is to eliminate child labor in all its form in 2025 and forced labor, human trafficking, and modern slavery by 2030. This comes from the shared conviction that each and everyone holds part of the solution, that we can collectively, by confronting our perspectives and learning from each other, contribute to ending these scourges with our fair share of responsibility and build a solution together. How do we do? Well, okay, first, we must create awareness about all these issues. We finance the global estimates, the ILO and other international organizations are producing about child labor. It was produced this year, and about forced labor in April. We have action groups bringing together international organizations with other stakeholders. We have produced reports about the very linkages between migration and these scourges, between global supply chains and child labor, forced labor. We have donors coordination in order to, we have, you said yourself, scarce financing resources. We must make sure that we coordinate these resources on the field in the countries. And we have produced a lot of indicators to measure progress, because this is one thing we cannot be reliable on. How do we do progress in countries? And these evaluation and monitoring indicators in countries are very important for us.
Right. So I want to interrupt you because look, well, hang on. I know you could go on for a great deal longer, but I've got a question which I'd like to put to you, which is this. It's a question that comes to us. And the reason I'm asking is because you're just talking about funding. Is there a way to tie funding to cooperation and collaboration with the planning and implementation stages of survivors? In other words, measurable, encouraging ways to bring smaller NGOs, larger organizations, and tie it up together with a funding requirement?
Listen, this is exactly the core of the question. And what we should do, and what Alliance does, Alliance 8.7 as an action-based partnership, it works and it's in country level. Because, you know, in the Alliance 8.7, we have set up a type of countries that we call pathfinder countries. These countries are available and willing to accelerate and take immediate action for that. And what we help them to do is to produce a national acceleration strategy that brings together all stakeholders in the field. That means NGOs, survivors, international organizations acting in these countries, but also a whole of government strategy that brings together ministers of labor, but also police, justice, and agriculture, mining. All these people must be together. And up to now, we have 23 countries from Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, not yet Arab states, I should say, 23 countries that put together all these stakeholders, all the fundings together, and choose the solutions to implement in the field. The rule of law was set. It is a very important thing, but also to address root causes, you know, of these, all these issues. And what is very important also is that developed countries now become pathfinder countries, which means that on the spot in their countries, they fight against these scourges, but also in their global supply chains.
Very grateful that we got that from, we drilled into that, which is, of course, being a business and financial journalism, I tend to sort of know that it usually ends up being about the money somewhere, and as long as that's available. Thank you, ma'am. We have two more people we do need to speak to. The CEO of the Freedom Fund, Nick Grono, is with me. Let me just apologize. There's, you know, it's a very large panel and somebody always is first and somebody's always last. So to those of you who I'm coming to later, I do apologize for that. It's just the nature of the way it was all sorted out. Nick, the role civil society plays, I often get the feeling that civil society has to bear the brunt when government has failed to do its actions.
Yeah, Richard, you won't be surprised to hear that I agree with you. You know, and it's really interesting. You're pushing on things like collaboration and coordination, but I find it's really easy for governments to talk about collaboration and coordination because it doesn't require the really hard action that we need to tackle this endemic problem. Right? It's really important. Don't get me wrong. The more collaboration, coordination we get, the better. But if we really want to drive change, it's not the 2 C's or the 3 C's. I was trying to work out an alliteration for you. Here's 4 R's. We need resources, we need research, we need reporting, we need regulation. The resources have to go to the frontline organizations, the local organizations that are really close to the communities that are being enslaved today. You keep on talking about prevention, which is absolutely key. Well, we have to work with survivors, local groups that are, you know, working with the communities in the quarries in the Congo or the cocoa fields in West Africa and the brick kilns in South Asia. That's the only way we really drive change, and we have to bring them together. And that's what my organization, the Freedom Fund, does. Connect the funding and the resources and bring it to clusters and groups of local NGOs working together. We need the research that others are talking about. Let me say the reporting. I want to get the reporting. You guys play such an important role. We need the investigative reporting, right? But you will get a lot of your tips and your knowledge from the local organizations on the ground. The amazing work that CNN's done in Libya or in Cocoa in West Africa and so on. It comes from the local partners, the grassroots organizations, but they get left out of this equation. And governments, including the US government, are starting to talk about the importance of getting funding to local organizations. We need to see a lot more of it. And then we need regulation. We need tough laws. We don't need talk about collaboration and cooperation. We need the laws to be put in place. The G7 has just been talking about doing work on forced labor, but it's just talk. We need some really powerful legislation that holds companies to account. The companies that are saying we're going to eliminate forced labor from our supply chains, well, there are no consequences if you don't really kind of live up to the commitments you're making. So
I want to take a question. I want to throw a question to you, though, which just has come to me, Richard Question. I won't say who it's from because I don't know who minds and who doesn't mind their names being used. COVID-19 has done two things. It exposed gaps in combating human trafficking and exacerbated the inequalities. Can states focus their efforts in preventing trafficking, addressing the vulnerabilities? So staying with you, Nick, addressing those vulnerabilities with your 4 R's. I think I got 3 of them: resources, research, reporting, and regulation. Does your 4 R's address the vulnerabilities of government allowing?
Well, we have to bring that approach. I mean, the world, the people that are enslaved are the most vulnerable in the world. And there are many poor people that are much more vulnerable as a result of COVID. I saw the World Bank said something like another 93 million have been pushed into extreme poverty. And those are the people that are going to be exploited. Right. And so governments have to respond to that increasing need. And it's tough. I mean, it's not easy. But the way you're going to do it is get to the communities that are the most vulnerable. And that means funding the grassroots partners, the local partners that are there day in and day out. But it's hard. And I know that the UN and international donors find it really hard to get money to small NGOs. Right? But that's where organizations like the Freedom Fund play a really important role, because we can help get it there and help make sure that they work together and they collaborate and they report and all of those other important things. But most importantly, they help prevent slavery and they help bring really vulnerable people out of that situation of exploitation.
Nick, we'll have more from you in the general discussion in just a moment. Finally, to Francisca Aouar, the founder and executive director at the Survivors Network. In a way, I sort of did deliberately leave you to the end out of no disrespect, but I wanted our next general discussion to be led, if you will, by a Survivors Network thought. What do you need? What do you want? What's gone wrong?
Thank you, Richard. I'm sorry I have a bad voice. Actually, we survivors/victims, we are often left out. I really wonder, there should be this scenario of survivors inclusiveness, but don't get us just included and we sit there and we don't have any say. We need to be included and also engaged in any decisions that countries at country level or regional levels or at the global level want to take concerning what we are all here for. Notwithstanding, during the COVID-19, that is, I will speak from a basic and more practical level, I took upon myself personally to go into the communities, and I really saw that it has hit hard on people's family and their livelihood. I went into cocoa plantations and there were women with babies, broken cocoa beans from the pot. It's a very hard thing to do with the sharp knives they use. So what I really want to place on this table is that, as my colleague Chandra highlighted, they need to look at that direction of survivors empowerment. We know, coming from an African country, the government, there is first of all lack of job opportunities. So what I always wonder we should push forward is getting survivors engaged in little businesses from the basis, as well as vocational skills should be trained so that at least with that skills, even if you're displaced, speaking from my background, I'm from the English-speaking part of Cameroon, where we have the ongoing crisis and people are constantly being internally displaced. So with that skills, if you're displaced, I think the skill stays with you and you can search for a job in your new host communities. But basically on this table, on this panel, I really plead that survivors and victims should not be left behind. We have firsthand experienced what we are all struggling to put down. So let's be on that same table to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you. We've heard from everybody now at least once, and now we can go into more of a general discussion for the next half hour. And there you all are. What I ask is if you wish, look, it's a discussion, it's a debate, it's a, you know, if you wish to speak, because I can only see you all on a small screen, just do that. Just raise your hand, wave at me a bit, and I might not get the names right, but I'll probably say the lady in the middle, the lady. Well, I'll get to you in good point. But it's important now that we widen this out. I want to go back to Keith Shannon first, and just say, look, Keith, there's a question here. There's a question here. I'm bearing in mind what we've heard, and I don't doubt for a second the expertise and the importance and significance of what we've heard. But it says the question is, conversations happening at global fora like this are disconnected from the reality of those on the front lines of exploitation. I'm not sure I agree with that because we have heard from the Survivors Network, but you do get what I mean here. This high, I mean, even the name, high-level virtual event, sounds like we're doing a high wire act at a circus. But you get the idea. So how can we take it from the pomposity and grandiosity to the reality and practicality?
You're right. I think at high levels of misnomer, it really is getting down to that granularity of the experience of, you know, everyone on the screen and more. And it's about how we share that and use the best practice. And I was very, very struck with what Nick was saying about some of the very effective action the Freedom Fund has been pioneering. And particularly around sort of some of the work on, you know, sharing good practice on legislation, labor rights, but also around enforcement. That's really, really important because there is a lot of shared experience from different types of countries with different backgrounds and different problems about how to tackle this. And the more that we can do that, the better. But absolutely, exactly what Francisca was saying as well, really bringing that survivor's voice through, not just about how to support them as victims, but to learn about how the situation arose and to address that through every means we have possible, wider development. The UN University published the Developing Freedom report earlier this year, which the UK supported, and it made some very, very compelling points about the role that tackling modern slavery can play in addressing development needs, socioeconomic needs as a whole. And that's something we should all try and address.
Assuming that there's only limited amount of funds, where do you see the UK putting its priority?
So again, this is something we're reviewing at the moment as part of our modern slavery review. And it would be a combination of work we're doing in the UK to improve our domestic response, but also work overseas. And we will look at the countries where not only there's maybe the most prevalence, but where we as the UK can maybe play a particular role because of our legislative background or history, or particular vulnerabilities to global supply chains in that. So that's something we certainly look at with others on screen as well, other organizations.
Can we go back to Austria, please? The Deputy Director in Austria. I just want to clarify, because we had to cut you off. You weren't able to hear my question earlier, but a question from the audience is this for you, sir. I think massive awareness building can minimize the scale of human trafficking. How can this approach be implemented in country and internationally, specifically when it needs bigger funding? How can it be managed? We're talking about the awareness building that needs to take place.
You're absolutely right in this here, because awareness raising is essential. Because if you can't detect the typical scenarios of trafficking in human beings, you cannot fight them. and therefore earlier detection. And the earlier it happens, the more valuable is it, or the more promising is it. As it was mentioned before, prevention in general, and awareness raising is a part of prevention, is much more paying off than helping victims. I mean, I'm not against helping victims, but if you have to help victims, the crime has already happened. But we want to minimize the crime, and therefore we need prevention, and therefore we need many people, not those sitting around here in our circles, because they all know something about trafficking, but the people out in the streets, the people who see a group of laborers, the people who see people working night shifts in a restaurant, the people who see a cleaning lady never leaving the house, and if so, with very dark rings under her eyes. So those people, to figure out that there could be a scenario that actually trafficking is happening. And trafficking is not happening in some far place on another continent, but it's happening in all our countries. The US is doing a yearly report, a so-called TIP report, Trafficking in Persons report, and they find something in every developed country, as does the OSCE when they do their research, as does the UNODC, and as it does the Council of Europe, or if the EU does supervise the member states. So it's happening everywhere, and you cannot do enough awareness raising and prevention work.
So let's go to Chandra. Chandra, here's an interesting question, which is, in fact, it's going to go to two of the survivor networks. It'll go to Chandra and it'll also go to Francisco. I want to hear both your thoughts on this one. It says here, males, as in men, or boys, are an incredibly overlooked population when it comes to human trafficking, especially sex trafficking. As victims, we are trapped by our egos, and male survivors of trauma have 14 times the normal suicide and 32 now the normal rates of drug overdose. How can we help the global community and the media break the stigma of male trafficking? Male trafficking, what do you think?
That's an interesting question. Firstly, previous question is you say lost track. Yes, on prevention, we lost track on male trafficking because of the stigma, because of taboo, and we often don't talk about male trafficking. But now I think it's start opening in our community and society of anti-trafficking, that we start to talk about male sex trafficking, LGBT, and other things, not only girl and woman. We just need to elevate this conversation through education and prevention. Education and prevention is very important to educate our community and society, which is, this is happening not only girl and woman, even though the study said over 70% women and girl, they are a victim of trafficking. So besides, I think on this particular education is we have to talk about justice for those people, and also talking about the demand, because of we talk about male trafficking and we don't talk about the demand. I think it's not, it's not complete, because it's a package.
But that has always been the case, hasn't it? I mean, if we talk about, for example, prostitution in the developed world or in the major cities of the world, we're always talking about the supply versus the demand in that sense. And I wonder, Francisco, related to that, this issue of male trafficking, which is it's all underreported, but it is lesser discussed, and even those who are involved believe they face greater stigma and ego because.
Thank you, Richard. I will highlight by saying that trafficking is mostly associated with the vulnerable population. That's women, children, and girls. So it's something that has been there, and now we are struggling to change the narratives. Notwithstanding, I was so amazed early in 2019 to get a male survivor to come speak in a speaking opportunity. I was surprised myself, but notwithstanding, males are very reserved and they always have their ego, as you rightly said, to stand out there and come to the open and identify themselves that they are either victim or they have survived the situation concerning human trafficking. So that makes that gap very wide for us to really see how we can push forward to bring male human trafficking for male and boys on the table, as well as violences affecting males. They have put that gap. So we are struggling, but the gap is still large.
So as we move into the discussion, and there's plenty of time for more, thank you for that. Next part of the discussion, I want to talk to, I want to discuss with the ILO, the Deputy Director of the ILO and the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator. We're going to go from survivors in a sense, and we're going to go right into the heart of of deep policy and coordination, since this is the UN. And the question is, the ILO and NGOs could advance technical and financial support through institutional linkages for developing social protection system for combating trafficking and the victims. The thinkers are better off just as they are exploring ways such as problematic for years. It's a complex question. How and in what ways, who will extend cooperation and collaboration in meaningful ways? Start with you, ma'am. Martha.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I think I'll just give an example. I mean, if you look at skills, for example, if you look at collaboration in meaningful ways, and it's not just, whether it's UN organizations, regional organizations, and this is part of what Anashe was referencing about the importance of a network like Alliance 8.7, where you can have countries, governments, civil society organizations come together and really be strategic. So for example, in skills, we're doing this in a way where we're able to have skills development and actors come together. And you think, what does skills have to do with human trafficking? Well, I would, and this is just, I want to go back to Wolfgang's point, because I would probably provide a counter to this. I think survivor-led strategies can contribute to prevention, because you're giving a chance for survivors informing our strategies to feel empowered about how they take charge of themselves, how they can support their families' needs, and working in peace and contributing sustainably to their developing economies around the world. We can absolutely harness the energy of these individuals for strategies for individuals who've never been trafficked in the first place. So when you're looking at skills, for example, youth entrepreneurship, we're looking right now in Africa, and this is in partnership with Alliance 8.7, where we've just had a skills challenge innovation call, working with a variety of organizations that will really allow for us to take the best, quite frankly, of the UN and our skills development, and be able not only to provide the money, which is important, but more importantly, to be able to help them understand how to actually execute their dream, whether that is how to start a business, how to invest and take care of their money, and be able to help grow their money. These types of projects we're working on very closely. And I think this is where there's, they're multiple but small, but I also think that small begets great. And so if we're able to take these investments on an innovation challenge and skills call and take our high-level policy and translate it down into practical, tangible action that can help a small-scale farmer, that can help a woman who'd like to start a business.
Right. Yeah. So you've just summed it up, haven't you? How can we take our high-level policy, which is vital because it sets the architecture by which governments then legislate and regulate, which then flows down. So I get it. But Diane Schmidt, the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator, I understand the way the flow works. What I try to understand or push on with, Diane Schmidt, is how we can speed it up, how we can recognize what's happened. So, for instance, a question: what must frontline NGOs do in order to present niche services to airlines, airports, law enforcement, immigration decision makers? We could say the same thing about coordination of government. What do they need to do? What to further it?
Thank you very much. I mean, it's very important to discuss different issues in order to bring them down also on the ground. And at EU level, we have network with national rapporteurs, which come together twice a year to discuss very specific problems. It can be also what can we do in the digital area, what can we do in other areas, in labor enforcement and so on. And we do the same also with civil society organization, because it's important to listen to civil society organization, and we bring them together twice a year also. But I think I want to say something about how we can bring this down on the ground and make really the difference. Obviously, we cannot do everything. We have to work with national authorities, with civil society organizations who are active on the ground, with businesses, as I said before. But let me give you one example. In June, there was a very big cooperation between 22 EU member states with the help of Europol. They identified 630 potential victims. There were 299 arrests. And this was in following inspection in labor-intensive sectors and on domestic workers in several member states. These are European action dates, which are led by several member states. And this makes a difference on the ground, because that's the identification of traffickers, which have to be brought to justice then, but it's also the identification of victims, which need support.
Now, there's a question.
And then obviously funding.
Hang on, there's a question specifically to you, Ms. Schmidt. It says, if structural dimensions are decisive when it comes to trafficking, why is the EU not focusing on an EU-wide minimal wage or the improvement of gender equality instead of criminalization of sex work buyers to combat trafficking for sex? Won't it lead to further victimization?
This goes much further than what we are discussing here. A new minimum wage, which or gender equality. I can only tell you, as there is a strategy on trafficking, combating trafficking in human beings, there's also a strategy and an action plan on gender equality, and we are also working on a minimum wage. This is another area. But I think everyone has to join the forces. Why are there coordinators in member states at international level, at EU level? Because we have to ensure that all the different policy areas and politicians active in different areas work together in order to address this problem of trafficking. Because it's cross-cutting, it's cross-sector, and it's important to deal with it in every area. And the question relates to two areas which are also very important here: employment and giving the condition, the right condition, employment conditions, and non-discrimination also, and support, especially to victims which are more vulnerable.
Let's see the group. Let's see everybody all together, all our experts in one go. The experts that we'll talk about, because I'm going to give you the opportunity. Nick, I'm probably going to talk to you next. Nick ran at the Freedom Fund and John at Microsoft. And really, Nick, when you hear what you're hearing, and when you hear what you hear, and you realize that everybody on this call is absolutely committed to the eradication of human trafficking in their own individual ways, but the Herculean uphill task, I wonder where we go next.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and everyone here is deeply committed. Know many on this panel, and they've dedicated their careers to fighting trafficking. Let me make two concrete points that we can do here. I mean, we're talking about governments. Governments can significantly increase their funding to grassroots organizations, either directly or through intermediaries. We know that is impactful, and we know it can be done. That can be done straight away. And the other thing is regulation. We haven't really talked about regulation, right? There's some great legislation out there. For instance, the US, and I'm not always complimentary about the US on this, but they have great import ban legislation that is hugely impactful. The one thing that changes corporate behavior is a direct threat to their bottom line. So if you are importing goods that have been made with child labor or forced labor, the US government is being very active at stopping them at the border. The EU has talked that they might do something about this. Well, we'd love to see some action acceleration. The Commission President von der Leyen has kind of talked about the importance of import ban legislation. That would be really impactful. The UK isn't talking about it at the moment. We would encourage the UK to talk about import ban legislation. There's much, much more that I could talk about, but those are two concrete actions that, you know, deeply committed people could help achieve if the political will is there.
Is the political will there, do you think? I don't, and this is not about any specific country. Is there the political will to break the eggs to make the omelette?
I think there is some political will. I was really encouraged to see G7 leaders, you know, the leaders of the biggest economies in the world, talk a few months ago about the importance of tackling forced labor in supply chain. So we all have a role in holding them to those commitments. CNN has a role, NGOs have a role, and we can say, look, you've made those public commitments, let's see the action. And one concrete action, one concrete measure is import legislation. You've said you want to make a difference. What we really need, I think, is a leading international champion, a leader of a government that is going to be up there day in, day out, pushing this issue, putting political capital into the issue. And we don't have a champion for this. We have lots of leaders who are committed, but no one who kind of makes it the issue of the day for them front and center. And I think that would make a big difference.
Right, we're coming towards the end, and I'm going to go down the list. Let's see the celebrity squares of our panel. I also recognize that you're all seeing different versions of that. I think you're all seeing different versions. In my version, I've got Martha in the top left. So I'm hoping that she's in the top left for everybody else's version. But I'm going to go across here one at a time. And you've got about, I'll give you 30 seconds at a push. That's going to be, and I'm going for what it is you want. All right. Now imagine that I'm suddenly your fairy godmother. I know that's hard, but try please if you will. And I'm going to grant you one wish. And your one wish will be related to this, obviously. And it can be regulatory, it can be research, it can be resource related, but it's going to be your one wish. So I'm going to start with you, Martha. You're in the top left. Martha, your one wish that I can grant you, it's something that you would like, please.
Sure. I would say my wish would be that the global objective is greater than any of our individual goals, and that we all need to redouble our efforts and commit to ending the scourge of human trafficking together. Oftentimes, we all have our
nicely done, nicely skirted.
Oh, stop.
Nicely.
Okay, you got it.
Right.
That's it. That's my set. I'll stop right there.
All right. Keith, I want to hear from you next, but I don't want a policy point. I want a practical point. The one thing that you think either your government, HMG, or globally, and no policy point. What is it?
Well, I'm sure we would all want more money, Richard. But from a personal point of view, the thing I would prioritize is awareness, particularly amongst consumers, so that they know and are aware of where supply chains are falling down and where forced labor is most at risk. And they can then play their part in helping to address this problem as well as businesses, individuals, and governments.
Chandra Waruntu, I think you're next in terms of the celebrity square boxes that we saw. Yep, yeah, the one thing that the fairy godmother Richard can grant you.
Okay, as a survivor inclusion is very important. To the government state member to have an advisory council to the government in prevention, protection, and prosecution work on the best practice by developing national referral mechanism. So that's my wish.
You never know. Christmas is nearly upon us. You never know. Diane, at the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator, the one wish that if you can get on this subject, what would it be?
I would say a zero tolerance approach in order to avoid that trafficking in human beings finds its way in goods and services in the world, and
Zero
protection of
tolerance.
victims, obviously.
Zero tolerance approach. Kamal, at the Human Rights Commission in Bangladesh, if there's one thing that you could be granted now, what would it be?
Yes, definitely. In order for stopping this movement from the country and stopping this human trafficking, introduce livelihood support programs for people who are most at risk. That is very important, and that should be introduced. At the same time, people who are there in the corporate sector, where there are most violations of human rights because of taking the job of some people, they should be more careful about these people. So there should be a coordination of these two things, and so that the people get regular support for their livelihood and they can overcome this crisis period.
Thank you. I think it's John Frank at Microsoft that is next. The one thing.
Richard, I'll be very practical. I would like the opportunity for the International Organization of Migration and our data experts who've worked on the counter-trafficking data collaboration to brief the CNN reporting team working on this, to show them how they can use those tools to enhance their reporting.
Well, that's a wish I can grant easily. I mean, fine, wish granted. My assistant said, your people talk to my people, and we'll have a conference call. And now that was an easy one. That was an easy one. And I suspect something told me you knew that was what it was going. But there we go. You've got your wish. I've made somebody's wish come true today. Nick, I guess I'm not going to be able to make your wish come true, but I'm very keen to hear what it is.
Richard, I have faith. Look, grassroots organizations are the absolutely key actor in fighting slavery and tremendously neglected. I think the richest governments in the world provide less than $200 million a year in funding to grassroots organizations fighting slavery. This is to fight a crime that generates over $150 billion a year in profits in forced labor. So even if they just modestly increase their funding to say $1 billion a year, which is a fraction of aid budgets, it's a fraction of what we've spent on PPE in the last 18 months, it would have an immeasurable impact on fighting modern slavery. In the context of the scale of the problem, that really is a modest ask.
A modest ask, and we listened carefully. I think it's Wolfgang who's next in the celebrity squares. That's there. The one thing that you would like.
Thank you very much, Richard, but I'm afraid I'm not sure whether you can grant that wish. I would wish if all the people I'm working together, government and non-governmental, would receive all the personal resources, the time and the funding they claim they need to fulfill their jobs. I think many things would be helped and healed.
I think merely raising the issues gives us great hope in this. Anusha, the chair of Alliance 8.7, it's been lovely having you with us today. We heard, of course, the reference to the excellent work that your organization and Alliance is doing. Now, what would you wish for?
Well, my biggest dream in this area is to see a youth movement, of awareness upraised with survivors as ambassadors and reporters like you and the CNN Freedom Project to help them give a huge public opinion awareness of this issue, as we have it with the youth with climate change. The same thing for human trafficking, child labor, forced labor, and to see that tomorrow we can have social display on goods and people can buy their consumption behavior, those products in which there are child labor, forced labor, or human trafficking involved.
Thank you. Now, by my reckoning, there are two left. there are two people left, and one of them is Dr. Fatima Waziri Aziz, the Director General at the National Prohibition for Trafficking from Nigeria. There are so many things you can wish for, aren't there? This subject is so vast that one doesn't know where to begin. But if you had to begin and ask for one thing, what would it be?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Quest. Mine is really easy, and I think you can grant that. So I want to see sustained and age-appropriate awareness creation on the ills of trafficking in persons, and also support towards return and rehabilitation of survivors. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, to you, ma'am, what is it you would like to see? What is your last, I'm looking for the piece of paper where we are in the list here. What is it that you would like to see? The last, you get the last word.
I am in line with Nick. I really wish for fundings for survivors empowerment in grassroots organizations, especially in developing countries. And then notwithstanding, still on funding, Nick particularly, please, how can small organizations like us get to be eligible to have fundings from big organizations? Thank you.
The funding, which is back to the funding. And there we have our group. I'm very grateful. They've all been superb. The technological difficulties overcome. The commitment is clearly there across the board. Thank you, one and all, for doing this today. I am aware that this is not the usual way the UN goes about its business, but I make no apology for that. These are exceptional times in the post-COVID era, and to learn that the incidence of human trafficking, sex trafficking, has risen or has worsened during COVID, well, one's not surprised, but it redoubles the efforts. And I'm grateful to our panel who has come here today. You are the ones that are doing the hard work. I'm only the one that comes along every now and again and asks a few difficult questions. The permanent representative of Qatar is back with me. The ambassador is back with me. I suspect, Ambassador, if I were you, I would get your tin helmet on and be prepared for the incoming criticisms and God, you question what he did and battle back for this. But I hope that we've managed to shed some light on an increasingly appalling, worsening situation. And I'm grateful and honored to have been part today. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, dear Richard, and you indeed did. Thank you so much for being such an inspiration and for your commitment. You really kept the discussion lively, focused, and you really brought out the best in each of our great panelists today. I really, on behalf of the co-sponsors, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you. Ending these crimes needs collaboration, cooperation, and commitment, and you've made it clear in your interventions today during the discussion. We have heard great recommendations on how to move forward. It requires, of course, goodwill and conviction. Much more remains to be done, as you have all clearly said that. It is clear that we need to focus on prevention, and addressing the root causes is crucial. And this is what we have done in Qatar. We have admitted that we have a problem. We have identified the many aspects of it. And we had the real conviction and will to solve the issue. And we would not have done it without cooperation and collaboration. And I would like to namely mention here the excellent cooperation we have with the International Labour Organization. Most importantly, we've focused our efforts on, again, prevention, prosecution, and protection. We have adopted a victim-centered approach. We have consulted youth throughout the process, and I've heard this clearly today, how important that we need to work with the youth on many stages in addressing this problem. We have abolished the sponsorship system that we knew that it was the source of many of the injustices that were taking place. Our efforts are having an impact, not only in Qatar, but we are setting an example for the region as well. And I think this is what we have highlighted today, not working in silo, but working together and setting an example for others. Let me conclude by saying that clearly ending these crimes require constant work, funding, and partnership. And I heard the word how the providing of the financial resources is key on the governmental side and also on the non-governmental side. We remain to be vigilant in our fight against this global human rights crisis. Count on us and let's work together. Thank you so much, and let's continue the conversation.